Hey guys, tonight we're not stepping into a grand ballroom or a foggy Victorian street. No, tonight we're slipping down the cold, creaky back stairs of a grand London townhouse, because you're about to become a servant. One of the invisible ones. The ones who scrubbed, fetched, polished and bowed, often without so much as a thank you. And let me tell you, it's not just hard work. It's a maze of rules so bizarre you'll wonder how anyone kept them straight without snapping. And it all begins before the sun even rises, because your day starts in the pitch dark, before the first of many bells rings, before the lady's eyes flutter open, before even the cook begins banging pots. Your first job? Get every fireplace roaring before the family so much as stretches under their feather beds. You won't believe this, but if you light a fire too late, the lady might complain that the air feels unwholesome. And yes, that's a real word they used. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And hey, leave a comment with where you're listening from and your local time. We've got a whole house of sleepy history nerds from around the globe. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You jolt awake in a freezing attic room where your breath hangs in the air like fog. No alarm clock, just instinct, and the knowledge that if you're late by even a few minutes, the master's boots will still be cold when he steps into them. You throw off the scratchy wool blanket, your feet hitting the stone floor. No fire for you. You're the one who lights them, remember? There's no time to dawdle. You dress in the dark, because striking a match to light your candle would be wasteful. The house must be lit from the bottom up, in silence. You tiptoe down servant stairs so narrow and steep they feel more like ladders. Your shoulder brushes cold stone. You're already dreading the soot on your apron, and the moment your fingers will go numb from handling the coal scuttle. Your first stop is the drawing room. It's dead quiet and colder than the outside. You kneel and check the grate. Last night's ashes are still warm, but you can't leave them. You scrape them out with practiced ease, making no more noise than a whisper. Then you lay a crumpled newspaper, kindling, and finally coal, striking the match with a silent prayer. A single cough of smoke rises and the room glows faintly orange. You move to the next one. And the next. There are 9 fireplaces this morning, and if even one fails to light, you'll get an earful from the housekeeper. Or worse, she'll tell her superior. Because in this house, there's a hierarchy even among the ones scrubbing the floors. Sometimes you wonder, why the rush to light fires that the family won't see for another hour? But it's all about illusion. The family must come downstairs believing the house is always warm, that it wakes up with them, that the world bends to their convenience. By the time the house begins to stir, your apron is smudged with soot, your fingertips raw from the metal grate, and your hair damp from sweat. But you're not done. Now it's time to haul up the water, 2 buckets at a time, for the bedrooms. The bathrooms, if you can call them that, are frigid little chambers where porcelain bowls and pitchers wait, spotless and cold, needing to be filled again. One of the strangest rules? No matter how early you rise, you must never be seen to be out of breath. A panting servant is a clumsy servant, and clumsy servants bring shame to the house. You catch your reflection in the hallway mirror, only to remember too late that you're not supposed to look into the master's glass. That mirror is polished for him, not for you. And all this before breakfast. You slip through the scullery like a shadow, steam rising from the massive copper kettle that's been rumbling for half an hour now. The cook is already in a sour mood. She caught the scullion boy yawning and smacked him with a ladle. You don't dare make a sound as you pass, carrying your tray of coal dust and fire irons like sacred offerings. It's still not light outside, but inside this house, the illusion of dawn must arrive early, as if the sun itself knows better than to keep a Victorian mistress waiting. Up the narrow staircase again. You move quickly but silently, because the lady is a light sleeper, and God help you if she hears your boots or the slosh of water. You pause outside her room, adjusting your breath, fixing your cap. Then a soft knock. Wait. Nothing. Then you gently push open the door. The room smells like lavender and starch. Everything is folded, ruffled and fluffed, and if it isn't, that's on you. You cross to the fireplace, kneel again, and go through the ritual you've now done dozens of times today. Ashes, brush, kindling, coal. You light it fast, a flicker of flame catching your knuckles. No noise, no smell, no smoke. You close the grate and move to the washstand, your arms trembling slightly as you pour warm water into the porcelain basin. Just right. Not too hot, not too cold. If it's lukewarm, she'll ring the bell in a fury. That bell is your nemesis. There are dozens of them strung up in the servant hallway downstairs. Tiny brass instruments with stiff little tags that name each room. They hang in a row like guillotine cords, and when one rings, the whole system jolts like a nervous system snapping awake. A sharp clang, and a servant must come immediately, no matter what else they were doing. Once, one of the younger maids was halfway through cleaning the nursery chamber pot when the bell rang for the front sitting room. She panicked, left the pot in the hall and ran. The butler found it. She was dismissed by nightfall. You finish with the ladies' room just in time. The coals catch. The basin steams. The bed curtains are still drawn. You bow slightly and step backward, closing the door without a sound. Back downstairs, you help lay the breakfast table. Everything must be symmetrical. The toast rack must face east. Yes, really. One of the master's eccentricities. He believes bread goes soggy more slowly that way. You don't question it. You just comply. You snatch a quick crust in the scullery, a corner of yesterday's bread, chewed fast and dry. Your own breakfast won't come until much later. No one cares if your stomach growls. It's considered undignified for a servant to appear too eager for food. Like an animal, one footman once muttered. You've never forgotten it, and still the day hasn't really begun. The first formal greeting of the morning hasn't even happened. Soon the family will descend like a flock of exotic birds, perfumed, powdered, perfunctory, and you'll be expected to become invisible again. Standing in corners, hands folded, eyes low, ready to move the moment a spoon clinks against a teacup. There's an unspoken rule among servants. The earlier your start, the smaller you must make yourself by breakfast. You become part of the furniture. You disappear before the second toast hits the rack. That's the real art of Victorian service. Not just rising early, but erasing yourself completely by the time the house awakens. And as the sun finally peers through the drawing-room window, lighting the polished silver you spent an hour buffing, you remember this. The family thinks the house simply glows like this naturally. They don't imagine your frozen fingers or your soot-stained sleeves. They never will. You stand by the hallway wall, spine straight, hands clasped behind your back, and eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards. Not the family portraits, not the grand mirror, not even the gleaming silver umbrella stand that cost more than a year's wages. Just the floor. Because looking around means you're idle. Looking up means you're impertinent. You've learned this lesson the hard way. On your first week, you smiled at the lady as she passed you on the stairs. Just a polite, tight-lipped smile. Something you'd offer a stranger in the street. She stopped mid-step and stared at you like you'd spat in her tea. You think this is friendship, she hissed. Don't grin at me, this is not a theatre. Her voice was sharp, but quiet enough to keep up appearances. You spent the rest of the day in tears, polishing brass until your knuckles bled. You never smiled again. That's one of the stranger truths about being a servant in this house. You can live under the same roof for 20 years and still never be permitted to show your teeth to the people who pay you. Your job is to be silent, invisible, and, above all, emotionless. A good servant doesn't have a personality. A good servant doesn't frown or sigh or laugh. You must be still, like wallpaper. Or better yet, air. The footman has it even worse. He's tall, striking, and in another life might have been an actor or a prize fighter. But here, his face is a mask. Blank as a statue, his voice rehearsed to perfection. Yes, madam. Very good, sir. At once. He once confessed to you, whispered behind the pantry door, that he keeps a tally of how many days in a row he can go without blinking in front of the master. His record is 12. You envy the cook. She gets to shout at the kitchen maids, curse at the stove, slam heavy pans. Noise is part of her job, but for you, even humming to yourself while scrubbing the window panes is dangerous. Once you caught yourself mouthing the words to a hymn while washing linens. The housekeeper's shadow passed by, and you froze. For a full minute you didn't breathe. She didn't say anything. But later that day, you found a smudge of coal dust on your pillow. It's their way of reminding you. You are never alone. The rule about silence extends even to the stairs. The main staircase, the wide one with the red velvet runner, is forbidden. You use the back one, the narrow, twisting, uncarpeted one that smells of old wood and boiled cabbage. If you're ever seen on the front stairs, even by accident, it's considered a breach of decorum. One young parlourmaid was dismissed for passing the butler on the wrong landing. Her crime? Being too visible. You've learned to breathe differently, to blink more slowly. You keep your hands folded low, your face relaxed and your lips neutral at all times. Sometimes you forget how your real voice sounds, and if you're ever spoken to, you keep your replies short. Don't offer ideas. Don't share stories. Never ask questions, especially not about things that don't concern you. The lady once asked if you had family in the countryside. You nodded. She asked if your mother was still living. You hesitated, unsure if that counted as too personal, and replied, "She was last I heard." The next day, the butler told you not to trap the mistress in long-winded tales. You never answered a personal question again. And yet, the strangest part? The family doesn't even realise how cruel these rules are. To them, it's simply how things are. They believe silence is dignity, that you prefer it, that speaking to a servant is a mercy, not a habit. You learn quickly, politeness is not for you. Conversation is not for you. Expression is not for you. You're here to serve, not to speak. There are moments, brief ones, when you nearly forget the rules. When something funny happens, like the scullery maid slipping on a cabbage leaf and landing in a basin of suds, and a laugh rises in your throat before you can stop it. But you choke it down, because even a giggle, if heard upstairs, can be considered disrespectful. Uproar in the servant quarters is a phrase you've heard before. It sounds comical. It isn't. Every sound you make is potential ammunition. That creak on the stairs, that thump of the coal bucket against the wall, all of it is noted. The lady has ears sharper than any gamekeeper. And she complains not just to the housekeeper, but to her guests. "They're getting sloppy," she once murmured over her fan, as though discussing stray dogs. One of them sneezed in the corridor. Quite dreadful. It's not just about silence either, it's about tone. If you're ever forced to speak, it must be with just the right softness. Not too loud or it's vulgar. Not too quiet or it's seen as insolence. A single wrong note in your "yes sir" can brand you as difficult. That label sticks, and difficult girls don't get good references. The butler once gave you a warning wrapped in a parable. "Do you know why a bell rings so sweetly?" he asked, sipping a sherry behind the pantry door. "Because it knows its place and makes only the right sound at the right time." You understood. You always understood. There's a cruel irony in the silence you're forced to keep, because despite never being spoken to, you hear everything. You hear the quarrels behind bedroom doors. You hear the mistress weeping softly into a lace handkerchief when no guests are around. You hear the master's heavy steps down to the wine cellar at midnight. You know more secrets than any member of the family dares to admit, and yet you can't speak of any of it, not even to each other. In the cramped attic quarters where the servants sleep, silence creeps in even there. Gossip is risky. Speculation is dangerous. If one word is overheard and traced back to your mouth, that's it. The boot, no warning, no pay, just a letter saying, "Your services are no longer required," and a curt nod from the housekeeper. You'll leave with your trunk and shame and nothing else. So the silence becomes a habit. It gets into your bones. You stop humming. You stop sighing. Eventually you stop thinking in full sentences. Just movements, tasks, patterns. When to curtsy, when to bow, when to vanish. Sometimes, when you lie awake at night staring at the wooden beams overhead, you try to recall what your laugh sounded like, or your voice when you weren't using it to recite, "Yes, madam," or "Very good, sir." It's a strange kind of mourning, grieving your own sound, and in those quiet moments you realize the silence isn't just a rule, it's a disguise, a way of erasing you from the house until you're nothing more than a shape in the corner of someone else's life. But you obey. Because the worst sound of all, the one you fear more than any bell or scolding, is the front door slamming behind someone who just lost their place. So you stay quiet, and you stay small. It's barely past dawn, but your fingers are already aching. You've just scrubbed the brass stair rods, carried coals, and folded linens that will be unfolded again before lunch. But now comes the real art. The boots. The master's boots sit like royalty atop a wooden rack in the boot room. 6 pairs lined in a row, each marked for a day of the week, though no one dares say aloud that he wears Thursday's boots on a Tuesday just because he fancies it. They are tall, polished leather with buckles that shine like gilt, and your job is to make them reflect more than just light. They must reflect reverence. You slip on your apron, one reserved specifically for polishing, and reach for the stiff bristled brush and a tin of blacking wax. It's thick, tar-like, and smells of turpentine and tallow. You smear it across the first boot in smooth circles, humming softly in your mind. Never out loud. Each pair takes at least 30 minutes. It's not just the surface. The soles must be wiped. The heels must gleam. The inside must be brushed with lavender water so the leather stays soft and smells refined. The tongue must lie flat. The laces must be perfect. Never tangled, never twisted. If the master feels even a speck of grit inside, he'll throw the boot at the wall. And if you're unlucky, you'll be standing nearby. Once, another maid tried to speed through her polishing. The next morning, a guest spotted a fleck of dried wax on the instep and made a joke over tea. The help's grown blind, have they? She was dismissed before sundown. They said she lacked pride in her work. But oh, what pride it takes. You don't just polish boots. You breathe life into them. You imagine each one as a relic, a totem, a signal of the family's standing. Mud on a boot suggests chaos. Dullness means decline. You are the invisible shield against shame. There's one pair in particular, the riding boots, that require extra care. Not because they're more fragile, but because the master wears them when he's feeling irritable. You've learned his moods through his shoes. If he chooses those boots, someone's getting scolded today. You make sure they're polished twice. And always, you check your reflection. That's the final test. If you can see your own face in the curve of the leather, eyes tired, hair tucked, expression blank, you know the boots are ready. And you know that once again you've done your job right, but don't think you're finished yet. There's the butler's shoes too, and the guest slippers, and ladies' velvet walking boots, which can't take the wax but must be brushed with a special glove made of doeskin. She once accused a maid of scratching the nap and refused to wear the pair again, then made sure the damage came out of the girl's wages. You work with the care of a jeweller, but none of the glory. These aren't objects of admiration, they're just boots, until they aren't. Until one glint of sunlight off a heel makes a passing guest mutter, "Now that's attention to detail." And even then, no one praises you. You just move on to the next pair. There's a hierarchy even among boots. The master's hunting boots demand one kind of polish, the visiting boots another. The worst, though, are the patent leather evening shoes. You dread them. They must shine like obsidian and be so flawless they reflect candlelight from 20 paces. One smudge, just one, and they say you've spoiled the whole look. You once overheard the master say he could judge a man's entire household by the state of his shoe tips. "A dull toe means dull servants," he said, swirling his brandy. So you sit on the hard stool in the boot room, shoulders stiff, hands coated in wax and grime, eyes narrowed to catch the tiniest flaw. Sometimes your reflection in the leather startles you, not because you're startled by your face, but because it's the only time you see yourself all day. But here's the real trick. The boots must look perfect, but they must feel worn. If they squeak too much, or pinch, or seem stiff, the master complains they were poorly kept. You have to maintain the illusion that the leather simply obeys him, that his every step is met with smooth, silent comfort, that he glides through his day on the labour of invisible hands. Even the laces have rules. The bow must be symmetrical. The ends must hang evenly, no more than a finger's length past the eyelets. Once, you tied them in a double knot out of habit, just to keep them from unravelling. Big mistake. He nearly tripped on the stairs and thundered down the corridor bellowing, "Who dared lace these like a sailor?" You didn't confess. No one did. But the scullery boy was blamed and got 3 days' wages docked. You slipped him half a roll from the pantry later. He never asked why. You begin to know the boots like personalities. The cracked left sole of the gardening pair that always smells faintly of peat moss. The tiny nick on the heel of the black dress pair, evidence of one too many steps out of a carriage. You polish around that nick like it's sacred, as if to fix it would be to erase part of the master's story. But here's the most absurd part. Despite all the time you spend with his boots, you've never once spoken to the man, not directly, not even to say good morning. You know his shoe size, his gait, his favourite boot hooks, but not the sound of his voice when it isn't barking orders across a room, and he doesn't know your name. To him, the boots simply appear each morning, clean, warm, waiting, as if they climbed onto the rack themselves overnight and sighed with contentment. He never wonders who polished them, or what hour that polish began, or how many chilblains you have from scrubbing in the unheated boot room. He just wears them, and tracks mud back in again. Still, you polish. Because there's power in the ritual. Because when you hold the brush and apply just the right pressure, it feels like you control at least one thing in the house. The shine is your signature, your silent rebellion, your way of saying, "I was here. I made this perfect, even if no one ever knows it." You've polished the boots, folded the linens, lit the fires. But now comes another sacred law in the strange world of service. Never, under any circumstance, are you to use the front door. It's not just a suggestion. It's not just impolite. It's unthinkable. The grand oak double doors with brass knobs and lionhead knockers? Those aren't for your hands. They're for guests, for deliveries from Fortnum's, for gentlemen with pocket watches and ladies with parasols. The threshold is polished weekly, but no servant foot is ever meant to cross it. Instead, you use the side entrance, a plain, nearly invisible wooden door tucked behind the hedge, down a narrow alley that smells of cabbage leaves and coal dust. The steps are slick with moss in winter. Rats scurry along the wall in the dark, but it's your way in and out. You could be on fire, and still the butler would tell you to leave via the tradesman's path. There was once a young footman, a new one, who dared to step out through the front one snowy morning, arms full of packages. He was trying to help. He thought speed mattered more than appearance. Wrong. The master saw him from the drawing room and went stiff with offence. "Who is that?" he demanded. "A chimney sweep." The footman was gone by sundown. You learned then, appearance is everything, and in this house servants do not belong where beauty begins. What's strange is that the front door isn't just forbidden, it's mythical. You walk past it every day and yet never really see it. If a guest knocks, you're not the one to answer. That's the butler's domain. He opens it in full regalia. Tailcoat, white gloves, chin lifted just so. If you're caught loitering near it, even by accident, you'll be accused of aspiring. That's the worst insult a servant can receive, to want more than your station. You remember once being sent to fetch something from the front hallway, a forgotten umbrella perhaps. You had to cross over the rug, just 3 steps, but in those 3 steps, your entire body tensed. The chandelier above caught your reflection in the entryway mirror. For one surreal moment you saw yourself not as a servant, but as a guest. Your hands trembled, and just as quickly you turned and fled back to the kitchen stairs, cheeks burning, heart racing. Even the post is segregated. Letters for the family arrive through the front door, placed on silver trays and announced with dignity. Letters for the servants, dumped in a wooden box by the back stairs, tied with rough string and often opened out of curiosity by others before you even see them. The irony, sometimes you have to clean the front door, polish the brass knob, wipe the glass, but always from the outside, never from within. You kneel there on your hands and knees, scrubbing mud from a place you're not allowed to enter, reflected in the glass like a ghost. Sometimes, in your daydreams, you wonder what it would feel like to simply open the door and walk out as if you belonged to the house, not beneath it. Not fleeing, not sneaking, just walking out with your head high. But then someone calls for tea and you drop the thought like a hot poker. The strange thing is how the front door acts like a line between 2 worlds, the elegant candlelit dream the family lives in and the coal dust reality you inhabit. And even though you move between them constantly, setting up breakfast parlours and emptying ashtrays, your existence is never meant to leave a trace. You're the invisible mechanism behind the illusion. When guests arrive, you listen for the sharp rap of the knocker from the servant hallway. That's your cue to freeze, literally. The footman steps forward, immaculate and silent, opens the door with practised flair and welcomes them in with a bow so smooth it might as well be choreographed. You're out of sight. Always. Your footsteps must not echo. Your presence must not interfere. Sometimes if you're stationed in the corridor or dusting a nearby stairwell, you catch glimpses of their coats, their glittering brooches, the way they look down their noses at the furnishings, at the home you know more intimately than they ever will. You've cleaned the banisters they lean on. You've scrubbed the scuff marks from their boots, and yet to them you're just air. Or worse, a flicker in the corner of their vision they pretend not to see. There's a tale whispered in the kitchen of a maid from a house up in Kensington who was seen leaning on the inside of the front door during a lull between dinner service and dessert. She wasn't doing anything improper, just resting a moment, out of sight. But the lady of the house returned unexpectedly, caught sight of her through the door's glass pane, and was horrified. Not because of impropriety, not because the girl has done wrong, but because seeing her there shattered the fantasy. Servants aren't meant to rest, or appear tired, or curious, least of all near the front. That's the great rule behind all the other rules. Maintain the illusion, and so you adapt. You learn which floorboards creak by the main hallway and avoid them. You memorize the path from scullery to stairwell that lets you pass unseen. You keep your posture low when cleaning near the entryway, shoulders hunched, eyes down. The lady once remarked she liked that her house was miraculously self-tending. That's what you are, a miracle of disappearance. But you don't resent the door itself. Not really. The door is just a symbol, a boundary. What you resent, if you ever let yourself think it, is how easily people forget you exist beyond it. On your rare half-day off, when you change into your best dress, plain grey wool still 3 years out of style, and slip through the side entrance for a breath of open air, you walk past the front gate, watching other people's carriages arrive. Ladies giggle, gentlemen strike matches. The world looks different. From out here, you want to touch the gate just to prove it's real. Just to prove you're real. But you don't. Because out here, you're still someone's servant. Even beyond the house, the rules cling to you like soot. And so you keep walking, past the front, back through the alley, into the servants' entrance again. The front door closes behind you, untouched. The aroma wafts up first, roast pork, warm bread and butter thick enough to coat the back of a silver spoon. Your stomach growls involuntarily. You've been on your feet for hours, your last bite a crust snatch behind the pantry door before sunrise. But now it's nearly noon, and the family is seated for luncheon in the dining room with thick napkins and soft voices. You're behind the wall, balancing a tray, praying the soup doesn't slosh. It's one of the strangest rules of all. You prepare the food, serve the food, and clean up the food, but you're not permitted to enjoy it. Not even when the leftovers are scraped back into the scullery basin in a warm, sloppy heap. Meals for the servants come only after the family's completely done, and the truth is, by then, it's barely food anymore. You glance at the long servants' table in the downstairs kitchen. It's bare, waiting. A few dented mugs, a jug of water with specks floating in it. That's what awaits you when the cloche lids are lifted, the butter is spread, and the guests laugh over gooseberry preserves. You know your place. You serve from the left, clear from the right, and never look directly at the diners. Your hands must be quick, silent, and your footsteps ghost-like. There's something particularly cruel about the way food taunts you, especially on Sundays, when the joint of beef is cooked so perfectly that juices run red onto the carving board. You catch the scent in the hallway and it hits your chest like longing, but you swallow the feeling. Literally. You can't eat until the dining room is cleaned, the dishes are washed, and the cutlery is polished again. Sometimes there are leftovers. Bits of veal, slices of pie with fork marks still in them, puddings collapsed from too much brandy. They're heaped into a basin covered with a damp cloth and set aside like afterthoughts. That's what you eat, hours later, stone cold. The lady insists the servants eat in shifts. To preserve order, she once said. What it really means is that you eat alone more often than not, seated at the long bench staring at a wall of hooks hung with mop heads and damp aprons. The food is usually mushy, tea gone bitter from sitting too long, and if something goes wrong upstairs, if someone drops a tray or breaks a saucer, you can forget eating at all. And yet, even in this system, there are finer distinctions. The butler eats better than the housemaids. He gets a slice from the fresh ham. He dines with his own cutlery. The cook gets first pickings, naturally. She's earned it, they say, with her red arms and volcanic temper. And you, the lowliest? You get what's left of what's left. Cold gristle. The heel of the loaf. If you're lucky, a spoonful of stewed apple. One girl once dared to sneak a plum from the larder. Just one, because she hadn't eaten all day. The housekeeper caught her red-handed, and the punishment was swift. No meals for 2 days. You helped. Sneak her crusts when no one was looking. She never thanked you, just chewed silently with tears on her cheeks. That's another rule. Gratitude is silent. The real insult isn't the cold food, it's the timing. You've just spent the better part of 2 hours carrying plates stacked like towers, balancing gravy boats with trembling wrists, and serving wine without spilling a drop. And once the final guest has dabbed their lips and declared themselves quite satisfied, you begin the long ritual of clearing. Only after all that, after every last breadcrumb has been swept from underfoot, are you granted permission to eat. But it's not just about waiting. It's about what you look like while waiting. You must not linger in the hallway. You must not glance toward the dining room. You must not inhale too deeply near the kitchen door. Even looking hungry is discouraged. Undignified, the lady calls it. If you're caught with your eyes too long on the roast goose or the raspberry tart, it's called hovering, and that's unbecoming. You're reminded that good help is content with simplicity, that a servant with appetite is a servant with ambition. So you school your face into indifference. Pretend not to smell the custard. Pretend not to hear the laughter echoing from a room where you're never invited to sit. You keep moving. There's always a napkin to fold or a door to hold. By the time your turn at the servants' table finally comes, the food is barely food anymore. The gravy is congealed. The potatoes have collapsed into rubbery lumps. The kitchen is noisy with scraping chairs and clinking enamel mugs, but the air feels different here. No one speaks too loudly. No one complains. You eat what's there, quickly, with your head down. There's no ceremony, no pass the salt, no linen napkins. You eat because your body needs fuel. Nothing more. Even your seating is assigned. Maids down one end, footmen the other. The butler and cook, if they're in the mood, take the middle, sharing quiet, superior glances like they've risen just high enough to forget how bitter the stew used to taste. You remember once asking the scullery maid what her favourite meal was. She looked at you like you'd asked her what stars tasted like. "Doesn't matter," she said. "You eat what they leave." And yet, even here, rules persist. You must not overindulge. You must not ask for seconds unless offered. You must chew quietly. You must be ready to drop your fork and run the instant a bell rings. The food isn't yours. You're just borrowing it between tasks. One girl once fainted in the scullery, collapsed right into the mop bucket. She hadn't eaten in over a day, missed her shift because of errands, then missed the next because of punishment. The housekeeper muttered that she was melodramatic. The cook barked that fainting was a luxury. And when she came to, she apologised. She apologised. That's the rule they never write down, but everyone knows. Your hunger must never inconvenience anyone else. And as you scrape your plate clean and slide it onto the wash pile, you feel it again. That odd little ache. Not just in your belly, but in your chest. The ache of being surrounded by food, immersed in the scent of roasting meats and sugary sauces, yet always 2 hours and one social class away from the real thing. Still, you swallow it down, just like the rest. The bell jolts you like a thunderclap. Not because it's loud, though it rings with a sharp metallic snap, but because of what it means. Drop everything. There's no negotiating with a bell. No. Just a moment. No. I'm in the middle of something. A servant's world turns on a wire, and that wire leads straight to the drawing room, the library, the upstairs dressing chamber, wherever a hand happened to tug a silk cord tied neatly to your panic. You freeze in the middle of scrubbing a chamber pot, your hands dripping, your apron soaked, and wait for the bellboard to twitch. It's mounted on the wall outside the kitchen like a row of trophies. Each bell has a little brass tag: master's study, blue room, dining hall, nursery. They all hang in order, slightly tarnished, slightly menacing. The wire jiggles, a bell swings. You watch for the nameplate. Ladies' sitting room. That's yours. You don't even wipe your hands. You throw the rag down, toss off your gloves and run. You take the back stairs 2 at a time. You don't breathe. You don't blink. The rule is strict. Never make a lady wait. A delay of even 30 seconds could result in a cold remark, or worse, a complaint to the housekeeper about your lack of readiness. And readiness in this house is everything. When you arrive, you knock gently and step inside, eyes lowered, breath held. The lady is reclining on a chaise. She doesn't look up. She merely waves a hand at the window. "The curtains," she says. "The light is ghastly." You nod, move to the window, and adjust the heavy velvet drapes by a fraction. No more, no less. If you block too much sun, she'll say the room feels like a tomb. Too little, and she'll claim the glare has worsened her headache. She doesn't say thank you. She never does. You back out silently. Downstairs again. Someone's already taken over your pot scrubbing. You don't ask for it back. That's the bell's power. It severs you from tasks, midstream, mid-thought. You belong to it, and it rings often, sometimes for actual needs, a tray, a letter, a shawl, sometimes for whims. One time the lady rang because she misplaced her embroidery needle. Another time because she felt a draft and wanted someone to check the corridor for ghosts. Not literally, of course, but the air did feel odd, she said. You always come. Always. Even if you're carrying coal buckets or kneeling with a brush between your teeth. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is to be known as slow. The worst part? The bells are never wrong. If one rings and you arrive and no one is there, or they say, "Oh, I must have leaned on it," you still apologise for your delay, for your confusion, for existing. There's a pecking order even with the bells. The master's bell takes precedence, then the ladies', then the children's. If they all ring at once, you answer the master, that's the rule. And if the nursery is in flames while you're fetching a brandy warmer, well, let's hope the nanny's quick. And so, like a dog trained to a whistle, you listen for bells in your sleep. You dream of them. You wake thinking you've heard one, only to find silence and your own heart thudding. The bell is your god now. It decides when you eat, when you move, when you stop, and when, just once, it falls silent for an entire afternoon. You don't feel relief, you feel dread, because silence usually means someone's watching. Later that day the bell rings again, 3 quick chimes close together. That rhythm is unmistakable. It's the library. And you know what that means. The master's home early. You're already halfway up the stairs before your mind catches up. You smooth your apron, wipe your hands on the fabric, and take a long breath at the door. The library bell is different. Not because it sounds any louder, but because it carries a kind of expectation. The master doesn't ring for trivial things. He rings because something is out of place, or because someone is. You knock and enter, careful not to look directly at him. He's seated in a leather armchair by the fire, a glass of sherry in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. He doesn't glance up, just flicks his fingers toward the hearth. The fire, he says, dying again. You kneel at the grate and begin rebuilding it, fast but quiet. He mutters something about poor airflow and inferior coal, but it isn't really about the fire, it's about control. You're a moving part in his house, just like the brass clock on the mantel or the silver inkstand on his desk. And if one part squeaks, it's your fault. As you finish, you spot his boots beside the chair, perfectly polished as they should be. But one heel is wet. Rain, probably. Still, you know he'll mention it if you don't. "Shall I take those, sir?" you ask gently. He doesn't answer, just nods without looking. You pick them up, cradle them like glass, and back out of the room as if you were never there. But you were there, and that's the danger, because each bell ring is more than a summons, it's a spotlight. And the more times your name is mentioned, the more likely someone will find a reason to whisper, "She's slipping." It's the invisible clock of the servant world. How many times you're called, how quickly you respond, how few complaints attach to your name. No formal chart tracks it, but everyone knows. The housekeeper knows, the cook knows, the butler definitely knows. Once the bell from the guest room rang 5 times in a single afternoon. A new housemaid had been assigned to it. Young, nervous, eager to please. By the end of the week, she was gone. Too clumsy, they said. But it wasn't clumsiness, it was visibility. She'd been seen too much, heard too much, called too much. She'd become a name, not a shadow. That's the trick. To serve so efficiently, so flawlessly, that no one notices you at all. So you move like a ghost through corridors, listening to the walls more than the people. When the bell rings, you're already in motion. When it doesn't, you rehearse your silence like a ritual. The anticipation is a constant hum under your skin, and sometimes, when the whole house is asleep, you sneak down the back staircase and stare at the bellboard. Just look at it. The little brass tags, the still wires, the tension that never leaves them. You imagine snipping a cord. Just one. Imagine silence. Not the quiet of tension, but the true kind. The kind that means freedom. But of course, you don't. Because come morning it will ring again. And you'll run to it. Every time. You've been on your feet since before the sun remembered to rise. And now your shoulders scream and your feet pulse inside your boots. You lean against the edge of the laundry table just for a breath. Just for a second. That's all. Then the housekeeper's voice cuts through the air like a blade. Are you sitting? You snap upright like you've been caught stealing. No, ma'am, you lie, though your thighs still ache from the brief moment they touch the bench. She narrows her eyes. There's no time for loafing, she says, and moves on without waiting for a reply. There it is, the unspoken but sacred rule. You must not sit. Even when your fingers are raw from scrubbing linens, even when your knees crack from polishing the baseboards, even when you feel the dizzy lurch of hunger and heat in your head, you stand, you stoop, you kneel, you crouch, but you never sit. It's not just frowned upon, it's considered disrespectful, slothful, a betrayal of your position. If the lady were to enter a room and see you seated, even properly, even folding napkins, she might gasp as if you'd broken something. Once, a senior maid was found darning socks while sitting on the corner of a windowsill. She was warned, then reassigned to scullery work for a week. Why? To remind her what work really looks like. You start to learn how to sew standing up, how to start shirts hunched over, feet apart, one elbow braced against the edge of the ironing board. It hurts. Your back aches, your neck throbs, and your feet swell like overripe fruit. But you do it anyway, because sitting is a kind of sedition. There's a single wooden stool tucked in the corner of the scullery, the only seat allowed for servants who are injured or elderly, but it's rarely used. No one wants to be seen needing it. Needing, after all, is dangerous. Once you paused to adjust your boot, bending at the knee and resting for the briefest second on the lower stair. A younger maid saw you and gave a sharp intake of breath, as if you'd lifted your skirt or dropped a tray. Better not let her see, she whispered, nodding toward the housekeeper's door. You stood up straight and kept moving. Even the word rest is suspect. You don't say, I need a rest. You say, I'll see to the copper next, or shall I collect the linens? Anything that sounds like momentum, like service, like usefulness. Because the moment you suggest stillness, someone else fills the space you left, and that means you become the spare part. And yet the cruel paradox is this. The lady herself can spend an entire afternoon reclining on a chaise, reading poetry aloud to her pug, The master naps in the library after lunch with a blanket across his knees. The guests collapse into overstuffed chairs after every meal. And you? You hover behind them, standing always, your feet tingling with needles, your calves hard as iron. You've grown so used to standing that even when you're alone, truly alone, you forget how to fold your knees. You catch yourself pressing against the counter for support, feet planted like tree trunks. At night, when you finally lie down, your body doesn't know what to do with the softness. You wake with stiff joints, as if punished for lying down at all. That's the unspoken lesson of this house. Comfort is for the served, not the servers. There are tasks that beg for a chair. Mending stockings, stitching collars, repairing buttons torn loose from impatient fingers. But even in those quiet, fussy jobs you're expected to stand. Bent at the waist, the fabric pinched between your fingers, your spine slowly curling like a ribbon. The pain creeps in slowly. First your shoulders, then your back, then the dull hum behind your eyes. The upper servants sometimes get stools, small, hard ones, tucked in shadowed corners near the pantry. But they perch, not rest. A butler never sits in the presence of the master. A lady's maid might be allowed to sit while dressing her mistress's hair, but even then, only if the mistress doesn't need the mirror, or the brush, or the scissors polished. And if she does, up again, instantly. You once witnessed a rare rebellion. A chambermaid with red hands and soft eyes, maybe 17, dared to sit on the lower stair between breakfast and luncheon service. She was sewing a hem, not gossiping, not slouching, just sitting. The housekeeper saw her, of course, like a hawk spots a rabbit. "You'll crease your skirt," she snapped, though the real crime wasn't wrinkles. It was visible fatigue. We don't sit while others stand. The girl stood, apologized. 2 days later, she was moved to the laundry room, hotter, noisier, and even less forgiving. You've noticed over time that the family doesn't just expect silence and service. They expect constant readiness. Sitting, to them, is the opposite of readiness. A seated servant might hesitate. A seated servant might forget their place. Worse, they might think. And so, the rule is upheld. Even the architecture reflects it. There are no chairs in the narrow corridors, no cushions in the servant hall, no stools in the linen press or the scullery. The house isn't built for your comfort. It's built for your usefulness. But of course, there are exceptions, performative ones. During Christmas or a birthday celebration, the lady might announce, "Let the staff sit for a moment." She says it like a queen granting favours. And for one brief moment you all sit, awkwardly, stiffly, hands on laps, not quite sure how to fold yourselves into the chairs you're never meant to use. The moment is photographed in their minds, a portrait of benevolence. See how kind we are. See how they smile when we let them rest. You smile, of course. You always do. But the chair is too narrow. The floor is uneven, and the very air makes it feel like you've borrowed something you don't deserve. Even in church on Sunday, when you're marched into the pews behind the family, your seat is hard, short, and separate. Not just physically, but spiritually. You are present, but not included. And when you return home after a rare afternoon off, legs aching, mouth dry, body heavy, you sit at last on the narrow bed in your attic room, but instead of relief, there's guilt, a creeping whisper that says, "There's always something else you could be doing." That's the final cruelty. You spend every day forbidden to sit, and yet when you finally can, you've forgotten how to feel at ease doing so. Your body might stop, but your duty never does. You've spent so long learning your place beneath the family that you sometimes forget there's a whole other ladder beneath you. A pecking order among servants. nearly as rigid as the one upstairs. And like all things in this house, it begins with rules. Rules no one tells you, but which you learn fast, usually the hard way. You're not just a servant, you're a low-ranking servant, a housemaid, which means you do not speak to the butler unless spoken to. You do not enter the still room unless the cook asks for you, and you never, ever use the same staircase as the valet unless it's on fire. Your first mistake was taking the wrong stair. You'd only just started, green as grass, eager to make yourself useful. You were carrying fresh linens from the laundry and took the servant's side stair off the main hallway. It was early. You thought no one would be around. But at the bend you passed the butler, upright, silent, and radiating frost. He stopped. So did you. "You'll use the tradesman's stair," he said quietly, not unkindly. But that was all, and it was enough. You turned, found the narrow, uneven stair tucked behind the broom cupboard, and used that one ever since. Even when your arms were full, even when it was raining inside from a leaky pipe, even when you slipped and bruised your tailbone, hierarchy is everything here. At the top stands the butler, the master of the household below the family themselves. He oversees the wine, the keys, the silver. His words are law. If he likes you, your life is easier. If he doesn't, well, you'd best start looking for work elsewhere. Then there's the housekeeper, the iron fist of the household, dressed in rustling black and always smelling faintly of lavender and starch. She assigns your tasks, corrects your posture, and notices every flaw. Once, she found a smudge on a doorknob and asked the whole hall whose soul was as tarnished as the brass. You all spent the afternoon polishing with vinegar and shame. Beneath her, there's the cook. She rules the kitchen like a kingdom. She doesn't care what the butler says, and she can destroy your whole week with a glare. You pray she's in a good mood, especially if you're due to pass her during baking. The last girl who interrupted a soufflé now works in the pantry. Alone. Then come the senior maids and footmen. Those who've lasted longer know the corners of the house and have the housekeeper's ear. They assign you the worst tasks if they don't like your attitude. Toilet scouring, chamber pot duty, rinsing linens in ice-cold water while they fold hand towels in the warm drawing room. And finally, there's you, the bottom of the chain. You don't complain, you don't question, you just do. Because promotion is rare, but demotion, that happens before the soup cools. Still, you learn to play the game. You smile at the right moments. You fetch extra coal for the footman when he's hungover. You polish the bells so the housekeeper sees her reflection and nods. You don't want to climb the ladder. You just don't want to fall off it. The strangest part is how quickly this invisible hierarchy becomes second nature. You feel it in your spine before your eyes even catch who's approaching. That quick step in the hallway? It's the underbutler stand aside. That slow, deliberate tread with a cane tapping on the floorboards. The butler himself. Lower your gaze. Step back. Let him pass without making him change course by so much as an inch. Even the maid uniforms tell the story. The senior parlour maid wears black with a lace trim, her cuffs crisp, her apron embroidered. Yours is plain cotton, stiff and dull, with sleeves you've let out twice because new ones aren't provided. The cook has her own apron, a heavy canvas thing stained with decades of fat and pride, and no one dares touch it but her. There's one chair in the servants' hall that everyone knows not to sit in. It's not marked, it's not labelled, but it's the butler's chair. It's older than half the staff, worn smooth at the arms and creaky in the joints. Still, it has presence. You once saw the new scullery boy collapse into it after a long shift, and the silence that followed was deafening. He stood up so fast he knocked over his tea. No one helped him mop it up. That was the lesson. But it's not all pettiness. This hierarchy also protects. When a guest shouted at a maid once, slurring words and grabbing her wrist, the footman stepped in, silent but solid. Just stood there, eyes steady, until the man let go. The matter was never discussed openly, but the butler sent that same footman to run a personal errand for the master the next day. That was his reward. There's a kind of logic to it once you stop fighting it. A rhythm. Like birds in a flock, everyone knows where to go, when to move, when to stay still, step out of time, and you're scolded. But keep the pace, and sometimes you're rewarded. A warm roll, a kind word, a look that says you're doing well. You start to understand the unwritten rules. Don't outshine a senior. Don't gossip upward. Don't touch what isn't yours, even by accident. Never assume a favour earns another, and always listen more than you speak. You remember one rainy afternoon, soaked from running errands in the drizzle, you passed the housekeeper in the main hall. She paused, looked you over and said, "You've not dripped on the runner." Good. That was it. Not praise, not warmth. But it lit something in you all the same. A moment of being seen. A rare nod in a world that so often pretends you don't exist. And that's why the hierarchy holds. Because even at the bottom, you're part of something. Something vast and humming and orderly. You may be scrubbing floors, but you belong to the rhythm of a great machine. One that runs on silence, polish and deference, but runs all the same. Still, you sometimes wonder, if you vanished, truly vanished, would the machine even stutter? Would anyone notice the empty place in the servants' hall? Or would someone else simply step into your uniform, your duties, your name? You shake the thought away. There are stairs to scrub. You know which ones. The windows are already spotless. You know that. You cleaned them yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. But still, the cloth is in your hand, damp with vinegar and lavender, as you polish the same pane of glass for the third time this morning, because the rule is simple, if maddening, clean what's already clean. It isn't about dirt, not really, it's about impression. The family must never think there's dust. Guests must never wonder if the silver was wiped this week. Everything must sparkle with a kind of radiance that looks accidental, effortless, as if the house simply wakes up that way, which means you're often scrubbing things that gleam already, running a cloth along a stair banister that has no fingerprints, wiping down a brass doorknob that's already shining like the sun. You've dusted the library shelves so often you know which books have never been touched. A set of poetry volumes, still stiff at the spine. A travelogue about Egypt, smelling of paper and disappointment. The lady once ran her finger along the baseboard of the dining room and found nothing, no soot, no speck. And yet she frowned. "I sense it's been neglected," she said. "Not see, not feel, just sense." So you spent the next afternoon on your hands and knees, scrubbing with lemon oil while your knuckles bled. There's a kind of madness in it, polishing silver twice a day when it hasn't been used in a week. Ironing sheets that no one's yet slept on, folding napkins with such precision that one misaligned edge is treated like a scandal. It's a dance between reality and ritual, where the labour matters less than the appearance of labour. Sometimes you wonder if the family even knows, if they understand that the gleam of the banister, the absence of smudges on a mirror, the crisp line in a tablecloth isn't the work of chance. It's you. Quiet, constant, relentless, and still the tasks pile on. The fireplace in the blue room is empty. It hasn't been used since spring, but the grate must be swept daily. The mantel dusted, the fire irons rearranged in perfect symmetry. The lady says it keeps the spirits balanced. You don't ask what she means, you just sweep. The water jug in the master's dressing room is always full, even if he never touches it. You replace the water every morning. It's not about need, it's about order. It's about the house breathing in rhythm, and your job is to keep that breath steady, even when it's absurd. You once spent an entire afternoon straightening the tassels on the drawing room curtains. There are 96 tassels. You counted. The housekeeper walked by once, nodded and said, "Make sure they lie with intent." You had no idea what that meant. You still don't. But you did it anyway. The worst part isn't the repetition. It's the invisibility of it. You clean what's already clean, and no one notices. If they did, it would mean you'd failed. That's the twisted logic of the house. The more perfectly you perform, the less anyone is supposed to see you at all. You once spent 3 hours polishing the dining table until the wood glowed like honey. Not a single person commented. But the next day, when the cutlery was laid half an inch too close to the edge, the lady gasped. "This room feels slack," she said. That word stayed with you all week. Slack. As if one napkin out of line could drag the whole house into disgrace. So you double down. You begin to polish the backs of chairs, the undersides of spoons. You realign candlesticks that are already in a straight row. You dust the corners of picture frames no one has touched since Victoria was still on the throne. Not because you must, but because someone might imagine they were dirty. And that's enough to condemn you. There's a term they whisper in the scullery, ghost work. It's the labour no one sees, no one measures, but which is expected all the same, a kind of spiritual cleaning, a guarding of appearances. You begin to think of yourself less as a cleaner and more as a preventer. You don't wait for dirt, you hunt its possibility. You remember once overhearing the butler speaking to a visiting valet. "They've a good girl for the drawing room," he said, meaning you, "keeps things unnoticeable." It was meant as praise, and you took it that way, even though it stung. Unnoticeable is a strange reward, like winning a race and being told no one saw you run. Sometimes late at night, when the others are asleep, you walk the house in silence. You run your fingers along the mantel, not to clean it, but to feel it, to remind yourself that the gleam is real, that you did that, even if no one else says it. You whisper it just once. "I did this." Then you go back upstairs and fold into the narrow bed as if the day never happened, and still, tomorrow, you'll do it all again. You'll rinse spotless basins, you'll press already stiff collars, you'll sweep dry hearths, shake out dustless rugs, and replace the wax in a candlestick that hasn't been lit in weeks. Because that's the rule. That's the rhythm. Clean what's already clean. Polish what's already shining. Maintain the illusion that this house is not tended, but naturally perfect. And if you do it well enough, no one will ever suspect you were there at all. You're 19. You've been in service since you were 14, and by now you know the truth, even if no one says it out loud. You're not allowed to fall in love. Not openly, not privately, not at all. Because to love, to court, to flirt, to write letters tucked in apron pockets, is to risk everything. The lady doesn't say this. Neither does the housekeeper. But the rules are built around it like hedges of thorns. One wrong step and you're pricked on every side. There's no policy written on paper, but the expectation is clear. You live for the house, not for yourself, not for the boy in the stables with the soft brown eyes, not for the footman who sometimes carries 2 trays instead of 1 just to pass your station. You've seen what happens when affection blooms where it shouldn't. You've seen what follows. There was a housemaid not so long ago, Clara. She was clever, quick, barely older than you are now. Everyone liked her. She sang when she worked, quietly, sweetly, and she had a way of walking past the butler's assistant that made her skirt sway just slightly too much. No one said anything, but the house knew. One morning, Clara didn't come down. The bells rang. The lady's fire wasn't lit. Panic followed, then fury. By noon she'd been dismissed. No reference, no farewells. Her trunk was left at the tradesman's door. You overheard the cook mutter, "She got caught giggling in the corridor, fool girl." That was all it took. Giggling. That was enough to make the house decide she was unfit. Not for the work, but for the image. Because a servant with feelings is a servant who's distracted. A servant who writes letters in secret is a servant who might miss a crease in the napkin or a smudge on the window. And the worst sin of all? A servant who carries a child. The fear is everywhere. You feel it in the way the housekeeper stares too long at your waistline when you return from your half-day. In the way the lady glances at you if she hears laughter that isn't hers. There's no grace for those who stumble, no maternity leave, no quiet room for rest, just silence, and then removal. That's why you're careful. When the footman offers you a biscuit from the tray, you take it without a word, eyes down. When the kitchen boy lingers near the pantry door with a silly grin, you keep moving. When you find a note folded into the pocket of your apron, unsigned, harmless, sweet, you burn it in the scullery grate before you're tempted to read it again, because the house sees everything. Maybe not all at once, maybe not in a single glance, but eventually it always finds out. And if you make the mistake of imagining a different life, a cottage, a baby, someone who holds your hand instead of ordering it to polish silver, you're warned in 100 subtle ways that dreams are a kind of betrayal. You're here to serve, not to be wanted, and certainly not to want. It isn't just about romance. The rule extends further, deeper, into every corner of your private life, if you can still call it that. You're not allowed to marry, not unless you plan to leave, and even then, permission must be requested, granted really, by those who think they own your time. You once asked the housekeeper, as delicately as you could, whether a former maid had married after leaving. She gave you a look so flat and cold it made your skin prickle. "Married," she said, like the word tasted sour. "Well, she's someone's problem now." A problem. That's what you become the moment your life expands beyond the walls of this house. Because love, marriage, even family, they come with needs, with time off, with a risk of distractions, divided loyalties, whispered notes exchanged in linen cupboards, and the house wants none of that. It wants you wholly, body, mind, hands, hours, especially your hours. If you were to fall pregnant, it would be over, immediately. No discussion, no sympathy, not even a goodbye. You've seen it happen. One of the scullery maids, barely 16, began showing. She hadn't said a word, but the signs were there. The sickness in the morning, the looseness of her apron, the way she avoided the tight staircase. The cook noticed first, then the housekeeper. By the week's end, she was gone. Her bed in the attic was stripped before sundown, her name scratched from the duty chart. The family never asked. The lady, when passing the kitchen that evening, simply said, "That little one was noisy," as if she'd been dismissed for chattering too much, not for carrying life in secret. The rest of you understood the real reason, and none of you said it out loud. Even if you were married, your place here would vanish. Married maids are seen as unpredictable, needy, likely to quit when babies come, or worse, ask to bring them near, and that is unthinkable. Children do not belong below stairs, unless they're delivering coal. So, if love does come, and sometimes it does, it must stay quiet, hidden in glances, in brushings of hands, in secret walks when the house is asleep. It cannot bloom, it cannot ask anything of anyone, and it certainly cannot be spoken of. You once heard 2 footmen whispering after supper, joking about a cook's assistant who'd gone to work in a larger house, one where married couples were sometimes allowed in service together. "They share a bed, imagine that," one laughed, "and still she scrubs his drawers." You laughed too, quietly, bitterly. because that sounds like heaven compared to silence and aching and the fear of being found out. Sometimes, in your narrow attic bed, you think of a life where you could hold someone's hand without shame, where you wouldn't have to glance over your shoulder before smiling, where your body, your future belonged to you, not to a mistress's schedule or a bell on the wall. But here, your body is borrowed, your time is leased, your heart is simply in the way, so you keep it hidden, tucked deep beneath your apron, beating quietly, unseen, unspoken, unforgiven. The house is never quiet. Not really. Even at night, even when the bells stop ringing and the fires have died down, it hums with movement. Footsteps creak along attic floors. Pipes groan. The wind sneaks through keyholes. And voices, your voices, whisper through the walls, not the family's voices. Theirs are trained, deliberate, meant to carry. Your voices are different, soft, fractured, passed in corners, behind doorways, under your breath. But make no mistake, what you say, what you do, what you feel, is everyone's business. There is no privacy in service, no secrets that stay yours. You noticed it your first week, when you spilled a little jam on your apron at breakfast. It wasn't even much, a thumbprint's worth. You'd wiped it clean, changed aprons, and thought no more of it. But by lunch, the kitchen boy made a joke about sticky fingers, and the footman snickered. The housekeeper glanced at your hip that afternoon and raised one brow. The story had made its way around the entire servants' hall in under 6 hours. It's not cruelty, not always. It's currency. In a house where money is tight, favours are rare, and advancement is nearly impossible. Gossip is what people trade. Your mistakes become someone else's entertainment. Your embarrassments feed the invisible chain of whispers that binds the staff together and holds you in place. You learn to walk carefully, to speak even more carefully. If you're overheard muttering about the cook's temper or the master's laziness, it will find its way to the wrong ears. You might not even know who passed it on. Maybe the scullery maid who seemed so sweet. Maybe the boot boy you gave your crust to last week. Everyone listens. Everyone talks. But it's not just the things you say. It's the things you do. If you work too fast, you're showing off. If you slow down, you're lazy. If you're quiet, you're sneaky. If you laugh too much, you're distracted. There's no safe setting, no neutral. Even your belongings are fair game. You keep a small photograph in your trunk. Your mother, long before her hands curled with arthritis. You found it once lying face up on your bunk, even though you swear you'd tucked it deep beneath your folded stockings. No one said a word, but the message was clear. You are never alone. Your uniform is checked for wear, your shoes for scuffs. The way you carry yourself tells others what kind of day you've had, and they'll watch for that. File it away. Use it. If you receive a letter, the others glance at it sideways, reading the curve of the handwriting, noting whether it smells of tobacco or perfume. They don't need to read the words to guess the story. And should something scandalous happen upstairs, a broken engagement, a crying fit, a slammed door, you'll know about it by tea. Not because you were told, but because someone saw something and passed it on before the tea had time to cool. In this house, nothing stays secret for long. Not even your silence. You try to keep your head down. You try to stay out of it. But even that becomes suspicious. When you're too quiet, they wonder what you're hiding. When you're too still, they wonder who you're watching. The walls have ears, but the servants have eyes, and they're sharper than any mirror in the master's house. There's a game to it. You've learned the rules, even if no one taught them. Always act surprised when gossip reaches you, even if you already knew. Never pass on a full story, only half. And if you make a mistake, deny it. Then help polish the brass until everyone forgets. The cook once told you that the real reason gossip spreads so fast is because it's the only voice the servants are allowed to have. "We're not permitted opinions," she muttered while kneading dough, "so we wrap them in stories instead." And so the stories fly. Who was seen leaving the wine cellar too late? Who spent a moment too long adjusting the master's collar? Who received a parcel with no return name? You, him, her, any of you. Even grief becomes gossip. You learn that the hard way. When your father died last year, you received the letter during your midday break. You remember your hands shaking as you unfolded it by the scullery window. You didn't cry. Not really. Just stared. Hollow. But that evening someone told the footman you'd been moody all day, and by the next morning the housekeeper cornered you with a look that wasn't quite kind. "If you're too upset to focus," she said, "do let me know. We can find a girl who isn't." She never asked why you were sad, just made sure it wouldn't interfere with the silverware. That's the other side of the gossip coin. It's not just entertainment, it's surveillance, a living network. If you're falling behind, if you're distracted, if you've broken something and tried to hide it, they will know, and they will whisper it forward. But sometimes, it's not cruel. Sometimes it protects. Once, the lady dismissed a maid for supposedly being filthy. A single stain on her uniform. But the rest of you knew the truth. The maid had caught the master in a state he shouldn't have been in. Wine-drenched, reaching for what wasn't his. She escaped barely, but the house turned against her. And the gossip that followed, it told the real story, quietly, steadily, and within a week the replacement maid was never left alone in that wing of the house. Ever. Because gossip in a place like this is also how you survive. It's how you know which footman to avoid, which bell to answer with extra care, which corner is safest for crying when no one's looking. You never admit you rely on it, but you do, and so you listen. And you speak, just enough. Never the whole truth, never the full sentence. Enough to remain part of the current, not crushed by it. Because to be talked about is dangerous. But to be forgotten, even worse. You stand before the mirror in the hallway holding a dusting cloth, watching your reflection for a beat too long. Not out of vanity, not out of disobedience, but out of curiosity. Because you barely recognize yourself anymore. A face pale from early mornings, eyes rimmed with fatigue, hair pulled back so tightly you sometimes get headaches, and always, that uniform, stiff, black, severe, designed not to flatter, but to erase. The rule is unspoken but understood. Your clothing must conceal you, not adorn you. Everything you wear as a maid is selected to signal your position, to mute your presence, to remind everyone, especially yourself, that you're not here to be seen. Your dress is black, made of thick cotton or wool, depending on the season. It absorbs soot, hides stains, and shows your status in every fold. No trim, no colour, no individuality. The only variation is your apron, always white, always plain, and always spotless. If it bears even a shadow of grime by the time you're seen upstairs, you'll be told to change, and if there isn't a spare, well, then you'd better make one look clean, fast. Your sleeves must be full length and buttoned. No wrists on display, no hands left idle. Your hair is pinned so tightly under your cap that you can feel it tug at your temples with every step. You've worn it like this so long that it stays in place even when the cap slips, and heaven help you if your cap does slip. The lady once passed you in the hallway and tilted her head. "Tidy yourself," she said, barely above a whisper. It was more chilling than a shout. You hadn't realised one strand of hair had fallen loose by your ear. It was enough. Because your hair is not yours in this house. It's a symbol. Loose hair is common. Loose hair is inviting. And nothing, not a smile, not a curl, must ever suggest that you are available for anything but work. Even shoes are regulated. You wear plain black boots, rubber soles if you're lucky, leather if you're not. They blister easily, especially in the rain. You learn to line them with scraps of linen, but don't let anyone see you do it. Servants don't complain of feet, the cook says. Only dancers and aristocrats do that. The footmen, of course, have it different. Their uniforms are tailored, immaculate, gold-trimmed if the family's wealthy enough. They are the visible servants, the ones meant to impress. The housemaids, though, you're meant to disappear. Even your undergarments are inspected. The housekeeper checks them during wash rotation. If they're frayed, she frowns. If they're new, she questions how you afforded them. You can't win. There is a hierarchy even in laundry. You've learned to repair your own hems by candlelight, to reinforce stockings with thread picked from discarded cloth, to make your only 2 dresses last year's by keeping your movements small, your stains minimal, and your tears private. And the strange thing is, you begin to believe it, that you deserve to look like this, that to appear plain is to be good, that beauty belongs elsewhere, in the drawing room, on the guests, in the portrait frames, on the stairwell, certainly not on you. There's a kind of superstition about appearance in service. The more invisible you look, the safer you are. Pretty maids get trouble. Pretty maids get noticed. And being noticed, as you've learned, is not a blessing in this house. It's a liability. You remember Sarah? Skin like cream, hair the colour of chestnuts. She didn't try to be beautiful. She simply was. Her uniform never sat right on her, no matter how plain it was. The lady took against her instantly. "Too flushed," she once murmured to the housekeeper. "Too much cheek." It didn't matter that Sarah worked hard, that she folded linen perfectly and never once dropped a tray. She smiled too readily. Her eyes were too bright. She was let go within the month. Disruptive presence was the phrase they used. After that, you learned to walk differently. Smaller steps, quieter. You kept your face still. You pressed your lips tight before entering a room. Even when you were praised, you never looked proud. You once overheard the housekeeper telling the butler, "That one's appropriately forgettable." You felt oddly relieved. But it's not just about being plain. It's about uniformity. You must not outshine the others, nor appear below them. If your dress is too new, there will be questions. If it's too faded, you'll be told you lower the tone of the house. You must walk a narrow seam, clean, invisible, inoffensive. When new girls arrive, you can spot the mistakes instantly. They wear their cap too far back, or they choose the nicer apron, the one with the better lace. They may even curl their fringe or pin a brooch on their collar. You don't say anything. You just wait. The house will teach them soon enough. Even your scent is regulated. No perfume, not even scented soap. You wash with lye and wear starch. If the lady catches the faintest whiff of lavender oil, or worse, rose water, she'll declare it vulgar. And the master, if he smells it, you'll be accused of seeking attention. You're allowed to wear lavender sachets in your drawers, of course, because she likes the smell on her linens, but not on you. There was a rumour once of a maid who used rouge, just a dab, just enough to hide the grey bloom of long hours. She was dismissed, no warning. They said she had airs, that she thought herself better than her station. That was all it took. A tint to her cheeks, a breath of colour, gone, and so you become what they want you to be. Trim, tucked, buttoned, faded. You learn to see beauty as danger, individuality as a crack in the wall. You stop looking in the mirror except to check your cap. But sometimes, just sometimes, you catch a reflection by accident. In the side of the tea kettle, in the polished wood of the banister, and you remember the girl you were before the black dress and the apron and the silence. She's still there, behind your eyes. But she knows better than to show herself. The lady's corset lies on the bed like a challenge. You don't touch it at first. You never do. You wait respectfully until she gestures. Just a flick of the wrist. That's the permission. Then you step forward, eyes low, hands steady. Because dressing the lady is not simply a task. It's a ceremony. And it comes with rules so strict they may as well be scripture. Rule 13. The lady's underthings are sacred, not yours to discuss, not yours to examine, and certainly not yours to mishandle. You unfasten the corset carefully so as not to disturb the lace at the edges. You shake out the silk chemise from its lavender-lined box. Her stockings are already laid across the footstool, rolled, not folded, so they don't crease. Everything smells faintly of starch and perfume, like a cupboard that thinks too highly of itself. She lifts her arms lazily, like she's bored with the ritual. But it's not boredom, it's power. She knows how intimate this is, how close your hands come to her skin, how your breath must stay shallow so you don't offend her with it. She once dismissed a maid for heavy exhaling during lacing. You remember. You were the one sent to pack that girl's trunk. You help her step into the corset, the silk folding around her like armour. She lifts her chin and waits while you begin tightening. One tug at a time. Firm, not harsh. Tight, but not brutal. You've learned the perfect pressure over months of aching hands and quiet corrections. If you pull too little, she sighs and calls you weak. If you pull too hard, she gasps and clutches the bedpost, and then tells everyone at luncheon that the help nearly crushed her lungs. She makes small remarks as you lace. You'll need to start your collar again. Or, has the cook been letting you taste the cream? Nothing directly cruel, just sharp. A prick of the needle here, a flick of scorn there. Her tongue is more pointed than any of her hat pins. You answer with a soft, "Yes, ma'am," and another tug of the laces. The corset is drawn, the hooks fastened. She turns to inspect herself in the mirror. You stand back, hands folded, invisible once again. But that corset, that's the symbol of everything, of control, of rules, of restraint so tightly bound that you wonder how she even breathes. And yet somehow it's you who feels short of breath, not her. Because if anything goes wrong, if a lace breaks, if the silk tears, if she finds a faint wrinkle in the chemise, you will be the one blamed, and you will be the one dismissed. It's happened before. You remember the story vividly. A lady's maid, not in your house, but one down the road, was let go after the mistress claimed she mishandled the lacing, said the corset had been pulled unevenly, that it left a faint bruise near the ribs, a bruise, mind you, the size of a thumbprint. The maid was gone within the hour. She'd worked there 5 years. That's the terrifying part. These undergarments, these silent silk-bound rituals carry power. More than the china, more than the silver. A misstep here isn't just about mistakes. It's about intimacy. You're the one who sees her bare back, who fastens the hidden hooks behind her gowns, who knows which petticoat lifts her skirt just so. And because of that, you're both trusted and suspected. You're never to speak of what you see, never to mention that the lady has a mole near her hip, or that her stocking elastic is fraying, never to mutter that her chemise has been mended 3 times in the same spot, or that the master's collar smells of cologne she never wears. You swallow these things like stones. Once, a maid whispered a harmless joke. Just a little story about the lady's struggle with her corset, shared at the end of a long shift when the tension had finally cracked. She didn't name names, she didn't laugh too loud. But the scullery boy passed it along. The housekeeper heard, and by sunrise that girl's trunk was in the boot hall. She didn't even get to finish a cup of tea. Even when things go wrong, you must say nothing. One morning, While helping the lady into her underthings, you noticed a welt just below her shoulder blade, a dark mark. You froze for half a second too long. Her eyes caught yours in the mirror, cold, measuring. "Something the matter?" she said, voice like polished glass. "No, ma'am," you replied. You lowered your gaze, fastened the final hook, said nothing, because even compassion is dangerous here. You're not meant to see her as human, and she certainly doesn't see you as one. You are her reflection's servant, her second pair of hands, her silence stitched into fabric, and when she is dressed, fully buttoned, laced and smoothed, she never thanks you. She simply walks away, trailing powder and perfume. You gather the garment she left behind, still warm, still faintly scented. You fold them with reverence you don't feel. You store the corset in its drawer, straighten the edges of the chemise, rewrap the stockings in tissue, and then you wash your hands, not because they're dirty, but because they've touched something you weren't supposed to feel anything about. Because underthings are sacred, and feelings are not. The first time you heard it, you thought it was a joke. A servant, you, being asked to sort vegetables by size, to comb the fringe on the drapes with a special ivory tool, to place the slippers at exactly 30-degree angles by the bed. But it wasn't a joke, it was Tuesday. That's the thing no one warns you about. The master's whims are rules unto themselves. They may not be written in the servant ledger or announced in the hallway, but when the master decides something should be done a certain way, it must be done that way, forever, without question, without forgetting. One day he decides his newspaper should be warmed before reading. The next, the spoon in his teacup must lie horizontally across the saucer, not vertical, horizontal. And so, every morning after, you warm his paper against the fire and recheck the spoon's angle 3 times. Because if you don't, he'll know. He always knows. The master isn't cruel, at least not in the way the lady is, with her cutting looks and whispered insults. His cruelty is quieter, made of expectations so particular they border on madness. You remember when he returned from his summer in Bath with a fondness for cucumbers. Not to eat. He couldn't stand the taste, but to look at. He liked them stacked in his study, arranged by length, from shortest to longest, the green skins shining in the morning light. No one knew why, no one asked. Your job was simply to comply. For 6 straight days, you sorted cucumbers. Then, without warning, he declared them vulgar and never mentioned them again. He has favourite books that must be dusted but not opened. Favourite gloves that must be brushed but not worn. He once ordered the dining room rug to be turned 90 degrees before dinner, and then barked in confusion when it felt different the next day. And heaven help you if you forget any of it. One of the maids once polished the master's inkstand on a Sunday instead of a Monday. It gleamed. She was proud. But he noticed, said it felt interrupted. She was demoted to chamberpot duty for a fortnight. You keep a mental list of his preferences. You guard it like treasure. His cigars must be placed label out. His shoelaces must be laced under, not over. His writing desk must be aligned precisely with the edge of the rug, no more than 2 finger widths from the border. You once measured it 14 times in a row to be sure, because his whims are not just habits, they're tests. And failing one means you're no longer useful. Sometimes, late at night, you joke about it silently, inside your own head. You imagine him waking in a cold sweat because the butter knife was a millimetre too far to the left. You picture him gasping at the sight of 3 pears instead of 4 in the fruit bowl. But you never smile when you set the table. You measure, you adjust, you memorise. Because the master's whims may change daily. But the punishment for forgetting them, that always stays the same. It isn't just the oddness of his requests. It's how suddenly they arrive. The master never announces them with explanation. One moment you're dusting the windowsill, The next, you're being told that henceforth the ink blotter must be turned to diagonal after each use. It lets the desk breathe, he mutters, as if that makes any sense, and so you do it. Because logic doesn't matter, only obedience. He once decided his bath water must be precisely 104 degrees Fahrenheit, not 102, not 105. He brought a thermometer back from Harrods just for this purpose. The valet now spends 20 minutes each morning adjusting taps like an alchemist, adding ladlefuls of hot and cold water until the little mercury line settles in just the right spot. If it doesn't, the master sends the bath back. Yes, sends it back, as if it were a roast. Sometimes you think he's doing it just to remind you who's in charge. You remember the week of the green apples. He saw them at a neighbour's dinner party, perfectly round, all stacked in a crystal bowl. The very next morning he ordered the same. From then on, the green apples in the main hallway had to be polished to a shine and rotated every 2 days, so they'd never brown on one side. The lady even began checking them herself, peering down the hall as she passed, her eyes scanning for a dull spot. You never ate one. No one did. They were for looking, not tasting. And it wasn't only him. The guests sometimes brought their own rituals. There was the colonel who insisted his pillows be fluffed at precisely 4 o'clock, regardless of whether he was using them, and the widowed cousin who refused to eat anything cut into triangles. You made that mistake once, with the toast. She gasped as if you'd served her poison. None of it is meant to be questioned. It's all woven into the larger spell of the household. The idea that this place is a world apart ruled by unseen laws. Laws you're expected to absorb as if by instinct. So you do. You become an expert in nonsense. You know which spoon goes where, which shawl must be laid on the bed when the weather turns damp, which side the slippers must face when placed at the foot of the master's bed, toes out, heels touching. And yet, despite all this precision, the rules can turn on you in a moment. One afternoon, after months of following every whim to the letter, you forgot to realign the study chair after dusting. It was off by an inch, just an inch. The master walked in, frowned and muttered, "Something's off." He paced, adjusted, scowled. The rest of the day the household was tense. No music played. No one lingered in the halls. The blame had no name, but it found its mark. You spent the evening in the scullery, polishing trays that were already gleaming, asking yourself how a single misplaced chair could unspool a man's whole sense of order. But that's the truth of it. These whims aren't really about cucumbers or rugs or bath water. They're about power, about proof that the world can still be arranged just so, that while the outside is messy, London, Parliament, debts, disease, this house remains immaculate, controlled, and you're the one who makes that illusion possible, one perfectly placed spoon at a time. There are things you see in service that you were never meant to see, not because they're hidden, but because they exist in that strange middle ground, between whispered scandals and things politely ignored. And the longer you serve, the more you understand. Some secrets must be carried to the grave, but the rule is simple, absolute, and rarely stated aloud. Speak nothing, remember everything. You carry the lady's letters upstairs, the ones sealed in thick ivory envelopes, with handwriting that isn't her husband's. You don't look at the name, you don't even glance at the seal. But you notice the scent, orange blossom. You smell it on her gloves too when she returns from her charity outings. And you hear the change in her voice when she hums to herself, back from a carriage ride that lasted too long and looped nowhere in particular. The master knows. Of course he knows. But he says nothing. Not to her, not to the butler, just to the fire, as he stares into it longer than he used to, sipping brandy with a quiet fury that never spills over. Only once did he speak of it, after too much port. He muttered to no one in particular, "At least she's discreet." And so you become discreet too. You clean his ashtrays after he's gone, find the matchbooks from clubs he claims he doesn't attend. You air out his waistcoats that carry the scent of other perfumes. Jasmine once, rose another time, and once. Tobacco and honey, a scent that didn't belong to any woman. You folded that waistcoat a little slower than usual, but still said nothing. Because the punishment for speaking isn't always dismissal. Sometimes it's attention, and attention in a house like this, it can undo you faster than any lie. You've learned to look without looking, to listen without reacting. When the house is quiet and footsteps cross the upstairs floor long after midnight, you turn your face to the wall. When a wine glass is broken in a locked room and no guest is accounted for, you sweep it up without a word. Once, a housemaid in a neighbouring estate spoke too freely about the lady's younger brother, about his drinking, his debts, his sudden disappearance. The family sued her for defamation. She hadn't even said it publicly, just to another maid. But word got out, and suddenly she was dangerous. You saw her once, after. Working in a boarding house on the edge of town, her hands red with raw soap, her apron stained with bacon grease. She didn't look at you, and you didn't wave, because breaking the silence, even when you're right, means you lose the one thing that matters in service more than skill or loyalty, your reference. Without it, you're no one. No family wants a girl with a record of talk. Unreliable, they'll say. Too familiar. And that's it. Door after door, shut. So you keep their secrets. You bury them deep. Not because you want to, but because you must. Because the house remembers who spoke, and it never forgets. You once asked an older maid, long since hardened by the years, if keeping so many secrets ever weighed her down. She didn't answer, just looked at you over her needlework and said, "If I wrote it all down, the pages would catch fire." Then she went back to stitching like the thought had never passed between you. That's the thing. Every servant in this house is a walking archive. Of the glances exchanged at dinner, of the slammed doors after guests leave, of the tears muffled behind embroidered handkerchiefs. You see it all. You feel it all. But you say nothing. Because that's the cost of trust in a place that never gives you any. You know the cook has a bottle hidden behind the flour sacks, not because she told you, but because you once saw her hand tremble after a scream from the lady over a burnt pudding. Later that night, the scent of brandy filled the scullery like confession. You know the butler writes letters he never sends, long ones scrawled in a precise hand filled with names no one mentions anymore. You found the pages discarded in the fireplace, only half burnt, the ink still legible in places. Once you saw the words, "I should have left when she died." You never asked who she was. You've watched a footman slip into the garden with the lady's maid long after curfew. You've heard the muffled argument that followed days later, behind the linen press when she whispered. You said you meant it. He didn't reply, just walked away with his jaw tight and eyes low. And yet, none of this exists. Not officially. Not in the servant's logbook. Not in the eyes of the family. Because servants do not witness. They do not remember. They are vessels through which the household runs. Clean hands, blank faces, dry lips. Until, of course, a secret must be remembered. That's when they suddenly expect you to recall everything. Where the lady's necklace was last seen. Whether the guest from Tuesday had a red coat or a blue one. Whether you noticed any missing brandy. Whether the master's handwriting looked strange. And you do remember. Of course you do. But you answer carefully. Only what's safe. Only what keeps you on the payroll. Because the moment your memory becomes too sharp, too useful, you become a risk. And the house doesn't tolerate risks for long. So you carry the secret silently, They settle in your bones like dust in the curtains, quiet, heavy, nearly invisible. At times, you wonder what would happen if you did write it all down. Just once. Not for revenge, not even for justice. Just so someone, somewhere, would know that behind the polished floors and drawn drapes you were there. You saw, you knew, you endured, but you never do. Because in service, the price of truth is exile, and the cost of silence is survival. You're bent over the sink, scrubbing lace collars with icy water, when the housekeeper passes by and clears her throat. Just once. That's all it takes. You straighten instantly. She gives you a once-over, then gestures vaguely at your head. "Fix your hair." You nod. "Yes, ma'am." Even though you're not sure what's wrong. But you'll find out soon enough. Because here's another rule you've come to learn, etched into the fabric of every respectable household. Your hair must be invisible. Not just tidy, not just clean. Invisible. It must never draw attention, never shimmer, never escape, never suggest anything other than discipline and deference. One strand out of place, and suddenly you're unruly. Too many strands, and you're common. The cap helps, of course. That stiff, starchy thing with its ties and pleats. You pin your hair tight beneath it every morning, wrapping and twisting until your scalp stings and your temples throb. No curls must peek out, no wisps around your ears. The nape of your neck must be clear. You secure it with straight pins until it holds like armour, and yet, somehow, it's never quite enough. You remember poor Edith. She had thick, dark curls, beautiful ones, truth be told, though we never dared say it aloud. No matter how tightly she braided them, a few would spring loose by afternoon. The lady took one look at her one day and said coldly, "Your appearance is beginning to reflect your class." Edith didn't last the week. It doesn't matter if your hair is clean. Doesn't matter if it's brushed 3 times a day with vinegar and boar bristles. If it moves, it's offensive. If it shines, it's inappropriate. You once overheard a guest say, "I do wish the help wouldn't gleam so much. It's terribly distracting over tea." She was talking about a parlourmaid's hair catching the sunlight through the conservatory window. The parlourmaid was reassigned to the cellar pantry 2 days later. So now you take extra care. You dampen your brush before you style it, so nothing flies away. You twist it tighter than comfort allows. Some girls even scrape theirs back with soap, flattening it like wax. One burned the ends with a candle once just to stop the frizz. The housekeeper scolded her for the smell, not the method. And here's the oddest part. The lady herself has hair styled for volume. Loose waves, glossy pins, decorative combs, the kind of look that takes hours and a personal maid. Her vanity table is cluttered with pomades, oils and French scents. But she looks at you, scrubbed, plain, with a face pinched from tight braiding, and seems reassured, as if your discomfort confirms her elegance. The message is clear. Her hair is to be seen. Yours is to be erased. Even on your half day when you're allowed to walk into town in your best, you think twice before loosening your braid. What if someone from the house sees you? What if your reflection in the bakery? Window drifts back through the servant grapevine, so you leave it pinned. Always. Just in case. Because in this house, a loose strand is not just a strand, it's a threat. There's a particular shame in being noticed for something as small as hair. It's the kind of mistake you don't realise until it's too late. Until someone narrows their eyes at you across the drawing room or tuts behind your back in the servants' hall. You'll spend the rest of the day wondering, was it that loose curl? The shine near my temple? Did my cap shift when I bent to lay the fire? And you won't ask. Because asking would confirm the suspicion. You've seen the quiet consequences. A reassigned post. A cold stare from the housekeeper. An apron that doesn't get returned from the laundry until someone else's name is stitched into it. Sometimes the rules feel like they're not about propriety at all. They're about erasing softness, soft voices, soft hands, soft hair. Everything about you must signal discipline, restraint, control. If your body dares to show signs of nature, of being alive, untamed, human, it's corrected, compressed, hidden. You remember being a child in your mother's cottage before service. She would comb your hair slowly with warm fingers and a gentle rhythm, humming something tuneless. It hurt sometimes, but she'd always apologize after a tug. You cried once, not from the pain, but because you knew it wouldn't last. Now, no one combs your hair but you, and never gently. You've learned tricks over time. A thin ribbon tied under the cap to hold it in place. An extra pin placed behind your ear, hidden in the fold. At night, you plait your hair into a single long braid so it won't knot in your sleep. But you never leave it down. Not even in the attic when you're alone. Not even on your day off. It doesn't feel safe anymore. You once overheard the lady's niece talking about a maid in another household. She wore her hair down on the landing, can you imagine? Looked like a wild thing, like something from a painting. The others laughed. You didn't. Because for you, that wildness has consequences. You sometimes dream about it, though, that your hair falls free, that you run down the hall without a cap, the wind from the open door catching each strand like a banner, that someone sees you, not with judgment, not with disdain, but with recognition. And in the dream, you don't flinch, but in the waking world, you rise with the sun, twist it back tightly, secure each pin like armour, and prepare once again to be overlooked. Because beauty here is not a gift, it's a danger, and your hair, like everything else, belongs to the house. You're walking down the corridor with a stack of pressed napkins when he turns the corner. The master. His boots echo softly on the floorboards. You freeze, just for a second, and step quickly to the side, lowering your gaze. You do everything right. But he pauses. For a moment the silence stretches. You feel the weight of his eyes on your lowered head. You don't look up. You mustn't look up. Then without a word he continues past you, and your heart doesn't start beating again until he's out of sight. That's the rule. Eyes on the floor. Always. Not just when you're scolded. Not just when the family passes. Always. Looking a gentleman in the eye is not only frowned upon, it's considered brazen, forward, a kind of social trespass, even if accidental. You've seen what happens when the rule is broken. There was a parlour-maid once, bright-eyed, young, too new to know better. She looked up when the lady's son spoke to her, not flirtatiously, just naturally, like a person responding to a person. That was enough. Word got to the lady within the hour. The housekeeper didn't even wait until supper. She pulled the girl aside and said, "Do you think this is a music hall?" The girl didn't cry, but she didn't make it through the month either. You learn early that eye contact means confidence, and confidence is not for you. Your job is to blend, to become part of the wallpaper. Moving when needed, pausing when expected, never drawing attention. If the family forgets your name but remembers your usefulness, that's a compliment. So you train yourself to watch feet instead of faces. You learn to read moods by the pace of steps, the sound of sighs, the flick of coat hems. You can tell when the lady is in a foul temper by the sharpness of her heels on the stairs. You can tell the master is half drunk when he starts humming to himself in the corridor. But you never look up to see their eyes, and they rarely look down to see yours. There's a strange kind of sadness in it. This rule that insists you be invisible, because it doesn't just keep you safe, it keeps you small. You begin to hunch without noticing. You move through rooms sideways, backwards, always glancing down. The floor becomes familiar. You know every knot in the wood, every scuff on the runner. Even when you're praised, "Well done," or efficient girl, you're not supposed to meet their gaze. Just nod, curtsy, step away. And if you ever are looked at directly, truly looked at, it means something is wrong. You once broke a saucer in front of a guest. He turned toward you, not with anger, but surprise. And for the first time, his eyes met yours. He looked shocked to see you had a face at all, as if servants are meant to be shapes, shadows, hands without owners. That glance haunted you more than the broken china ever did. You notice over time that even among yourselves this rule lingers. At first, you thought it was just nervousness, but now you see it clearly. Servants rarely meet each other's gaze either, especially not in front of superiors. It's a habit, baked in by hierarchy. The scullery maid glances away when the housemaid passes. The footman avoids the cook's eye unless summoned. You find yourself doing it too without thinking. It's not about shame, it's about survival. The only place you sometimes dare to lift your eyes is in the attic, at night, when your uniform is folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and your cap is off, and the only light is from a single guttering candle. Up there, among the narrow beds and sagging mattresses, you might lock eyes with another girl and smile. Just a little. Just enough to remind each other you're real. But downstairs, in the glow of chandeliers and the weight of expectation, you look at the floor. You've grown used to navigating by peripheral vision. You can read the lady's mood by the angle of her chin. You can tell when the master's about to speak by the flex of his glove. You feel more than you see, anticipate more than you ask, because to ask would mean lifting your face, and lifting your face would mean everything. The irony is sharp. The family expects excellence, tables laid to perfection, rooms turned out as if by magic, but they cannot bear to see the people who make that perfection possible. Their comfort relies on your erasure, and sometimes the rule hurts in ways you didn't expect. You remember the day the lady's child fell on the stairs. You heard the cry, sharp and sudden. You were nearest, closer than the nanny, and you ran, instinctively catching the boy before he tumbled further. He clung to your apron, sobbing. You looked at him, of course you did. And he looked back, wide-eyed, trusting. But then the lady arrived. She snatched him from your arms, thanked you without warmth, and then said, so cold it felt like frost, "Do not look at my child," as if your eyes had dirtied him, as if your gaze was something to wipe away. You bowed, apologized, turned away. Later that evening you were reassigned to polishing the stair banisters, quiet work, punishment without the name. You still think of that child sometimes, the way he looked at you like you were there, the way your heart stung not from the lady's insult, but from the way she erased that one human moment. That's the danger of looking up. You see too much, and worse, you let yourself be seen, so you return to the habit, eyes down, voice soft, movements small, because looking up might remind them you have a soul, and in this house, a servant's soul is not part of the furniture. There's a certain art to disappearing while standing right in the middle of a room. You master it with time, the precise angle of your shoulder when setting down a tray, the half step back after presenting a letter, the way you hold your breath when a guest passes too close. Not to be ignored exactly. That would mean you'd done something wrong. But to become so unremarkable, so perfectly useful and forgettable, that no one ever really sees you. That is the goal. Because in the world of Victorian service, invisibility isn't just a survival tactic, it's a requirement. And nowhere is that more apparent than when the family entertains guests. You always know when company is coming. The air in the house changes. The footmen polish the silver until their fingers blister. The housemaids scrub the floors on their hands and knees. The cook mutters like a woman possessed. The housekeeper becomes an extension of the bell system, appearing in doorways before anyone dares pull the cord. You vanish. Not literally, of course. You're everywhere. In the drawing room, lighting fires. In the front hall, brushing away the invisible dust. Upstairs, removing scuff marks from the floor with a dab of vinegar and a worn cloth. But no one should notice you. The moment the first guest steps inside, you must become part of the background. Not a servant, not a girl, not even a name. Just hands, movement, presence without presence. You're taught to walk soundlessly, to breathe quietly, to leave a room before your shadow stretches too far. It's not just etiquette, it's reputation. A guest who complains of a lingering maid could ruin more than your position. She could stain the house's image, and the lady will not allow that. You remember one evening when the drawing room was full, laughter rising like steam off teacups, gloves tossed carelessly on chairs, the smell of tobacco curling in the air. You stood near the wall, still as a vase. The lady snapped her fingers once and you moved instantly, tray to hand, posture exact. Not a single guest looked at you, but one did comment as you left. "How clever, I didn't even notice she was there." That was a compliment, and you took it like a medal. The funny thing is, your training in invisibility goes so deep, it begins to shape even how you think. You start preempting needs before they're spoken. You know when to open a window before anyone feels stuffy. You replace an empty glass before it's noticed. You refill an ink pot before the master calls for it. You don't need thanks, you need silence. The good kind. The kind that means you've done your job so flawlessly, they barely remember it was done. But the pressure doesn't end when the guests leave. Sometimes it gets worse. The lady walks the rooms afterward with a sharp nose and sharper eye. She checks for crumbs, for misaligned cushions, for forgotten calling cards. You're expected to make the house appear untouched, like 30 guests never trampled through the rug, or spilled brandy on the floor, or knocked a porcelain vase out of line. And all this is done without being seen. There's even a proper route you must follow when serving. Never walk across the centre of a room. Never pass behind a guest chair. Never speak above a murmur. If two guests are speaking and you happen to catch a scandalous word, you pretend you didn't. If someone is ill and calls for help, you assist without emotion, then vanish. Because in this house, presence is dangerous. You're there to serve, not to witness. And yet, you do witness. You see more in a single evening than the lady might guess in a month. The whispered arguments behind the doors, the trembling hands of the young governess when her fiancé arrives with lipstick on his collar, the way the master's voice lowers when he speaks to the French guest with just a little too much charm. But these things do not belong to you, not officially. You carry them like invisible weight, never speaking of what your eyes collect. It's a burden and a strange kind of power. There's an old joke whispered in the servants' quarters. If the walls had ears, they'd ask the footman to repeat it properly. But it's not really funny, because you are the walls. You are the ears, and yet you must remain quiet. Always. Once one of the newer maids let something slip. Just a careless comment about a guest's boots. She thought no one heard. She was gone by morning. No letter, no warning. Just gone. You learn quickly. Silence protects you. Invisibility saves you. And when you finally climb into your attic bed that night, your legs aching and your arms sore from invisible labour, the quiet up there is louder than anything. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it feels to walk through a room and be seen, not as a mistake or a shadow, but as a person. But down there, downstairs in those glittering rooms, you're a ghost with calloused hands, a breath that dusts silver, straightens pillows, carries secrets. And if you do it right, no one even knows you are there. You awaken to bells, not birdsong, not sunshine, not a gentle knock at the door, but the sharp metallic ring of the servant's call bell echoing through the corridor like a commandment from on high. It's the breakfast bell, and not yours. Because this morning the master has requested a special tray in bed, which means you must rise before dawn, before the scullery maid lights the kitchen stove, before even the rooster stirs in the courtyard. You swing your legs from the bed, already cold. The dormitory above the servants' hall holds no fireplace, just blankets, breath-fogged windows, and silence thick as syrup. You tiptoe across the creaky boards, button your uniform by candlelight, and begin your descent into the bowels of the house. Breakfast, like everything else in a Victorian household, is a matter of status and timing. And the servant's breakfast? That's something of a cruel joke. Your stomach growls as you pass the kitchen where the cook, who got up even earlier than you, slaps dough onto a board with the ferocity of a storm god. The smell of butter and rising yeast floats in the air, but none of it is yours yet. First, you must prepare his tray, and you do it like clockwork. Hot coffee in the silver pot, perfectly toasted bread, a coddled egg in its little stand, salt spoon, linen napkin, the paper ironed flat so it doesn't crinkle too loudly. You polish the spoon again, even though it already gleams. You fluff the napkin, you fold it twice. Then you walk it up 3 floors without spilling a drop. Because if you do, well, remember the footman who tripped last winter? 1 drop of tea on the master's waistcoat and he was sent to the stables by noon. He shovels manure now, no pressure. The master doesn't say thank you when you enter. He never does. He flicks open the paper and gives the smallest grunt, which is your cue to retreat. But not too fast. You have to remain nearby, just out of sight in case he wants something. Another piece of toast, a pen, a different chair. So you stand in the hallway, between the window and the grandfather clock, counting each tick like a punishment. Eventually the bell rings again, a sharp trill, and you step back in with a fresh napkin, though you know it isn't the napkin he wants. It's the creamer. Or perhaps he's changed his mind about the egg. Either way, you retrieve what's asked with no more than a nod and a quiet, "Yes, sir," and still you haven't eaten. Downstairs, the servant's breakfast waits on a long wooden table. Lukewarm porridge, yesterday's bread, tea brewed from leaves so old they might as well be paper. The footmen are already scraping their bowls by the time you return, and you catch the eye of the housemaid who handles the upstairs bedrooms. She gives you a sympathetic look. She knows what the master's early breakfasts do to the morning rhythm, but there's no time to linger. The bell rings again. You glance at the butler who barely lifts. His head. He's already moved on to planning the day's wine orders. The system hums without pause, and you step back into the rhythm, stomach half full, mind already on the next task. Because now comes the real breakfast, the one in the dining room. This is a production. Plates must be warmed. The silver dome over the bacon must not show a single smudge. The tablecloth must hang at precisely the correct length, no more than 2 inches from the floor. Knives and forks must align as if by compass, and the toast must be served upright in a rack, never stacked. Heaven forbid anyone's bread touches. You're assigned to stand behind the ladies' chair this morning, not because you're favoured, far from it, but because the last girl assigned there sniffled once during service and was replaced. You breathe through your mouth. You hold your posture as if your spine is an iron rod. You respond to nods, not words. And when you pour the tea, you tilt the pot with exactly the right wrist. Smooth, not too fast, and never spilling on the saucer. As you do all this, conversation swirls around you. They're discussing some nonsense. Stock prices, perhaps, or who was seen with whom at last week's garden party. You don't listen, not really. But one phrase cuts through. I do love having well-trained staff. It's as if they're not even here. And you realise they aren't speaking to you, but about you, right in front of you. You don't flinch, you don't smile, you don't vanish, because you've already mastered that art. Later, once the family has dispersed, you slip into the kitchen and eat the rest of your porridge cold. Someone left a crust of bacon, and you take it without guilt. It's one of the only small luxuries in this life, because you've come to understand something strange. You don't just serve breakfast, you are the breakfast. Polished, plated, offered up for judgment, then forgotten the moment the next course arrives. But you don't break. You just carry the tray back down the stairs, your footsteps light, your face blank, and your stomach still half empty. Always ready, always watching, always hungry. There's a saying among the older housemaids that gets whispered only after lights out, when the gas lamps are off and the air is thick with starch and secrets. A servant's worth is measured by how little they leave behind. Not fingerprints, not footsteps, and certainly not complaints. And so, your final task today, the most important, isn't polishing silver or fluffing pillows. It's ensuring your existence never disrupts the house's delicate balance, not even by accident, because tonight is the quarterly inspection, not of the house, though that too must gleam like a showroom, but of you. You're to be presented like furniture, upright, silent, proper, uniform starched, apron spotless, shoes blackened to a mirror sheen, fingernails trimmed, hair tucked, and your face expressionless. You're not to speak unless asked. You're not to ask anything at all. The housekeeper paces the servants' hall like a general before battle, straightening cravats, adjusting cuffs, even licking a finger to polish a scuff from a scullery boy's ear. She reaches you last. Smile, she says softly, but not too much. You're not enjoying yourself. You're honoured to be here. And so you do. You line up at attention. When the master and mistress descend into the servants' hall for the inspection, a rare, ceremonial crossing of worlds, you keep your eyes low. They walk slowly, nodding at some, ignoring others. The butler murmurs your names and duties like your items in a catalogue. Kitchen maid, second footman, scullery, upstairs maid, nursery assistant. When they reach you, the lady's gaze lingers a second longer than expected. She studies your shoes, your hem, your hands. Then she leans ever so slightly toward her husband and says, "That one's quite satisfactory, a reliable girl." You feel a flicker of something odd. Not pride, not even relief. Just a muted sensation that your training worked. And then the moment is over. They pass on. You become background again. When the inspection ends, the line dissolves like steam. The cook returns to her boiling pots. The footmen take down the gas lamps. The housekeeper vanishes without a word, and you, still clutching your hands in perfect posture, finally exhale. But the night isn't done. There are shoes to polish for the morning, letters to sort, coals to rake. Every trace of the day must be erased by midnight so that the house may rise tomorrow like it was born new. You find yourself in the scullery again, sleeves rolled to your elbows, scrubbing a copper pot that someone scorched during lunch. The blackened bottom peels away slowly, reluctantly, as if it resents your touch. A ragged piece of potato skin clings to the side. You flick it off. As you work, a small memory surfaces. One of your earliest days here, when you used to hum while scrubbing, turned you a sharp rebuke. Servants are not to fill the house with their voices, the headmaid warned. We are echoes, not music. You stopped humming after that. But tonight, in the quiet, just before the bells are wound down and the candles snuffed, you allow yourself a single, barely audible note. Not a song, just a hum. It lingers in the air for a moment, unnoticed by all, and then it's gone. You return to your attic room when the hall clock strikes 10. Your feet are blistered, your fingernails rimmed with soot, your shoulders tight from effort, but the uniform is still clean, your name unmentioned, your mistakes, if any, unseen. You lie down on the narrow cot and draw the coarse blanket to your chin, and for the first time all day you are alone. There is no bell to ring, no footsteps above, no demands to meet, just the creak of the beams, the whistle of wind, and the slow, soft thump of your own heartbeat. You blink up at the ceiling, the house sleeps, and so, at last, may you. Shh, you've done enough. The silver is polished, the trays are empty, the doors are all locked tight, and the fire in the drawing room has faded into gentle amber coals. Tonight, you've walked every hallway of a world long gone. You've lit candles, fluffed cushions, carried trays, and vanished into doorways like a shadow. You've seen what it means to be invisible and invaluable, all at once, and now you don't have to do anything more. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the ticking of some old grandfather clock far away in a distant corridor. The master won't call for you tonight. The housekeeper's steps won't echo down the stairs. The bells are all silent. Just you now. And stillness. Imagine the hush of that servant's attic. Imagine the scratch of wool blankets, the soft gusts of wind through loose window panes, the muffled sound of the city outside, but only just. There's no scullery to scrub, no apron to starch, no inspection to pass. Only this moment and the warmth of rest that's been earned. Let your mind drift now, like footsteps down a hall that leads nowhere in particular. You've served enough for one day. Let the house fade. Let sleep take its turn.